Thank you for joining us today for our latest webinar, Fitting Security into Your Software Lifecycle, Automation and Integration. My name is Brent Jenkins with Fortify Product Marketing. In this webinar, we will be discussing how to integrate with your existing investments and tools to provide seamless and immediate value to your organization. I have three excellent guests joining me today that will talk about automation and integration from different points of view, each with Micro Focus Fortify being the underlying theme. First up, we'll have Jimmy Rabin, Product Manager for Fortify. Next, we will be joined by Michelle Duffy, Senior Director of Product Marketing with Sonatype. And finally, we will have Dennis Hurst, Founder and President of Saltworks, an Oracy company. Just a quick recap. In our last webinar of this series, Getting Started with AppSec in One Day, we discussed several steps your organization can take to begin your application security journey. So I just wanted to quickly hit the key steps that came out of that webinar. First, we talked about aligning yourself with an established maturity model such as the OWASP SAM. Next, we discussed the advantages and the steps to take in creating security champions within your organization. After that, we went over performing an internal security assessment and some key prep and outcome points for that. Then we talked about defining your initial scope, which covered whether you want to use SAST or DAST if you can't use both. How do you enable your developers to code with security in mind? What are your expected outcomes and more? And then finally, we touched on finding the right tools that fit all of those requirements. If you missed this webinar, we will be providing a link to the on-demand version of it in the description below, or you can see a condensed version of it on our Fortify Unplugged YouTube channel. It's definitely worth a watch. Okay, so why are we here today? Well, one of the biggest challenges with application security programs is the friction it causes between other teams due to the idea that it slows down speed and innovation. Business goals are to generate revenue with product and feature releases. You can't slow that innovation down and still be competitive. Because of this, a fundamental principle of application security is to build security into your way of thinking and operating without restricting agility and innovation. We feel a lot of this is accomplished with key integrations and automation. So with that in mind, I want to pass it off to Jimmy Rabin, who will discuss how we here at Fortify approach and solve these issues. Over to you, Jimmy.
All right, thanks, Brent, for the introduction. My name again is Jimmy Rabin. I'm the Fortify Product Manager. Just wanted to spend a couple of minutes at the beginning of this presentation, just talking a little bit about some of the things that we've been doing in the product line to enable integrations from third parties, and similar to the integrations you're going to hear about today. So we have a commitment with regards to Software Security Center. There's nothing that we do or a feature that we add that don't have available RESTful endpoints. Should our customers or partners choose to automate that or directly call an endpoint. So that's our commitment to you. We do include a reference guide directly available in the product. It does include fully documented endpoints. You can try them out there right within the reference guide. We also have samples and additional documentation available at github.com/fortify and fortify.github.io that contains additional samples, including a really great project called the JavaScript Sandbox, which is designed to teach our customers and partners how to do various tasks and scenarios that are commonplace with regards to our API. So please do check that out. And if you kind of look across the software development lifecycle, you can see kind of the partners and other tooling that we've taken advantage of with regards to leveraging our API, specifically around IDEs and defect tracking systems and ticketing systems, pushing defects into various systems. The answer is not that we can't support a new platform, but we enable any ticketing system to be supported through our well-documented APIs. We've added a ton of functionality to our APIs as well, but we're always adding more and more. And as we go into kind of new models, we'll be looking to add additional capabilities to our APIs. So with that, I'm going to pass it over back to Brent, and we can move on from the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jimmy. So up next, we have Michelle Duffy with Sonatype, who will be discussing the open source market and how Nexus integrates with Fortify. Take it away, Michelle.
Hi, my name is Michelle Duffy. I'm a Senior Director of Product Marketing with Sonatype. Today, I'd like to talk to you about how we integrate our automated open source governance solutions with Micro Focus Fortify. But before that, I'd like to talk a little bit about the open source market in general. It's interesting to note that today, business applications are actually under attack. 51% of enterprises suffered at least one breach in the last 12 months. 43% of those enterprise attacks are perpetrated by external actors, not by people within the organization. And 68% of external attacks target web applications for known vulnerabilities. So organizations used to put up big network firewalls, but the reality is that organizations go through digital transformations and more of their applications are now on the web. Bad actors are looking for known vulnerabilities within web applications and attacking those and going straight to the data source. And so what's happening because of that, established business leaders are also under attack. Since 2000, 52% of Fortune 500 have been replaced. And that's happening because, as I mentioned, organizations are going through digital transformations. And now almost every company in the world is actually a software company. And established leaders are being replaced by companies that can deliver applications, innovative applications faster. Think about Airbnb, Netflix, Uber, and so forth. They're actually replacing existing organizations because they come to the market with an application-focused first approach, and they're building all of these applications, and they're building them faster and more innovative. And the way they're doing that is that they're developing DevOps or DevSecOps practices. Today, we see that those winners are releasing great software faster and more securely than their competitors. So they want to innovate, they want to deliver faster, but they also want to make sure that they're doing it in a secure way. Organizations that go through DevOps transformations or DevSecOps transformations are building out CI/CD pipelines, and they're trying to release their software very quickly. The best release daily, some release monthly, but those that release quarterly or more are really being left behind. And they're doing that because, and they're able to do that faster because applications today are no longer written from scratch. They're actually assembled from third-party components. Everyone today uses open source software. There's no reason for a developer to rebuild something that's already been built. They want to focus on the part of the application that is specific to their business logic and that provides them competitive features. They want to borrow open source components on the part of the application that are common and can be reused. So basically, what does that mean? In an organization, about 85% of an application, the code in an application, actually comes from open source components or is sourced from external suppliers. We like to view the software development lifecycle like a software supply chain. Not everything is built in-house, like I mentioned. You're getting those open source components from actual external suppliers. And basically, that means that every developer in your software supply chain is in procurement. They're out there choosing open source libraries, they're determining which supplier they're going to use, and they're bringing those open source components into your development lifecycle. At Sonatype, we are the caretakers of the central repository, which is the public repository for all Java open source components. And that gives us great visibility into the practices of organizations out there. As they automate their CI/CD pipelines, they're able to go and download open source components from Central much faster. And they're downloading them faster and faster, as you can see in this graph. In 2018, we saw 146 billion download requests from the central repository. So the growth and the demand for open source components is just rising very quickly. In the same way, if you look at NPM, which is the public repository for JavaScript, they get about 7 billion download requests a week. And so the demand for these open source components is just staggering. And basically, that means that because there's such high demand, the project owners of these open source projects are now delivering about 15,000 new releases every day. That's interesting to note. There's about 19.5 million open source components out there with 15,000 new releases every day. There's only 25 million developers globally in the world. So you can just get a sense of the amount of open source components these developers are consuming into their organizations. That's the good part, is that they're able to reuse software and deliver innovation more quickly. The bad part is that sometimes with open source there comes some inherent risk. We like to say that open source ages like milk, not like wine. So we can see that of all of those Java component downloads, about 11.1% of those download requests actually have a known vulnerability. And it's even higher in the JavaScript world. About 51% of JavaScript packages downloaded annually per developer have a known vulnerability. So it's great that developers are using these open source components. It's enabling them to be innovative, but they have to think about what, as someone in procurement, what they're bringing into the organization. And there needs to be kind of checks and balances to make sure that they're bringing in only the best and the highest quality open source components. And this is really important because what we've been seeing over time is that the attacks, the breaches in organizations is just happening faster and faster. Back in 2006, through an IBM report, we saw that it took about 45 days after a vulnerability was disclosed before someone actually got attacked or breached. But now, as late as 2017, with the Equifax breach, they had about 3 days. The Struts vulnerability that they were using was announced, and 3 days later, they were starting to be hacked. So the DevSecOps challenge for everyone is they have to automate faster than evil. If they're using automated CI/CD, then they can push out a new release much faster than if you're using old waterfall type methodologies. So organizations have to be aware of what they're using, know what their risk is, and then be able to fix it very quickly. So at Sonatype, we've developed a whole platform to automatically enforce open source policy and control risk across every phase of the SDLC. It's a complete integrated set of solutions designed to work together. The first solution is actually called Nexus Firewall. Nexus Firewall automatically stops risks from entering your software development lifecycle by enforcing policies when proxying to public repositories. So if you have an open source policy to not allow a vulnerable component with a CVSS score greater than 7, Firewall can actually block that component from being downloaded. We also have the Nexus repository, which centrally stores and manages all of your libraries and build artifacts across your entire software development lifecycle. And then we have Nexus Lifecycle that works at every phase in your development lifecycle to continuously identify risk, enforce policies, and remediate issues. We have Nexus Auditor, which is used to examine third-party applications or applications that are in production that aren't going through the software development lifecycle to see if there's any inherent risk in those. And all of this is 100% powered by Nexus Intelligence, which includes precise and actionable security, license, and quality metadata curated by more than 65 researchers. Nexus Lifecycle is an important part of our solution and is one of the ways that we integrate with HP Fortify. Nexus Lifecycle really starts with policy configuration. So as I mentioned, it enables you to automate and enforce your policy throughout the lifecycle, but first you have to be able to define your policy. And with Nexus Lifecycle, we have a very rich and flexible policy engine. It gives you the ability to create very customized policies based on app type and organization. They can be configured for security vulnerabilities, licenses, and to reduce technical debt. It's also the only solution where you can enforce those policies across every phase of your software development life cycles. You can choose to set warnings with emails or create JIRA tickets at some phases, or you could actually choose to fail builds at other phases based on the severity of the policy violation. And all of this is because of our very precise and actionable intelligence that we provide to Nexus Lifecycle to enable you to ensure that the data that we provide is accurate and so that you can take the right policy action. The next important part of Nexus Lifecycle is all of the reporting. So the first thing you have to do to understand if there's any risk in your applications is to have visibility into those open source components. And so by creating a software bill of material or identifying that risk, you can see a summary view of your security and license policy violations, and you can see that bill of materials to know exactly what's in your app and what open source components are included in that application. And as I mentioned, this is all done with our curated security data. The data that powers Nexus Lifecycle and the entire platform is curated by more than 65 security researchers 24/7. Their expert identification and remediation guidance makes everyone, including developers, a security and license expert. And we provide that data through reporting and dashboards, but also directly to the developer within their IDE and even through a GitHub pull request. The remediation guidance, as you can see, was designed so that developers can easily understand what the vulnerability is and how they should resolve it. Our researchers spend a lot of time making sure that the vulnerability description, the explanation, the detection, and the recommendation is written in a way that it's very easy for developers to take action and continue to move that build throughout the SDLC. It's also important to note that Nexus integrates early and everywhere with your favorite pipeline tools. The entire solution works with your favorite DevOps tools out of the box. No need for your development, security, or ops teams to learn a new tool. Our platform is uniquely architected to enforce policy and provide open source intelligence and remediation guidance right at your fingertips. And as you can see, we have an integration out of the box with Micro Focus Fortify to give Fortify customers a comprehensive view of both the vulnerabilities in the source code that developers write, as well as the open source vulnerabilities that they borrow from public repositories. The integration is available out of the box if you're a Nexus Lifecycle customer. Lifecycle scans come into Fortify via an IQ Fortify integration service. The data then is mapped to the IQ Fortify parser plugin and then is available to Fortify SSC customers right in the SSC dashboard. All of the intelligence about the component and the metadata around the open source components and the vulnerabilities are all hosted in Nexus Intelligence, which is a Sonatype hosted data services in the cloud. So here you can see an example of what that looks like. This is the Fortify SSC dashboard. This is a drill down specifically into a vulnerable open source component from the Sonatype Nexus Lifecycle solution. It's one place for your security experts to get both open source and proprietary vulnerabilities in a single dashboard. So you get that complete view of the inherent risk within your application. The risk of, as I mentioned, the code that developers are writing from scratch, as well as the open source code that they're actually procuring from other repositories. You can see if I drill into a vulnerable OSS component that was identified via a Sonatype, you can see that it's a critical vulnerability. I can see the description of the vulnerability. I can get some information about the actual component details. It's a Java component called Bouncy Castle. I can see if there's any effective licenses, when it was created. I can go directly to the website for this component if I need to. I can also then identify the issue, the CVE number, the CVSS score, the source of the data, and get a high-level overview of what's going on in terms of the risk with that component. But then I can get the full Sonatype scan report by clicking on the report URL and go into the lifecycle solution where I can get a complete software bill of materials for that application and identify specifically this Bouncy Castle component. I can then drill into all of the policy violations. I can view them by severity. I can see the inherent risk. I can also see the recommendations for how to remediate. So with this Nexus Lifecycle and Micro Focus Fortify joint solution, you have a single view into your open source and proprietary vulnerabilities in a single dashboard. If you'd like to learn more about how Sonatype works with Micro Focus Fortify, you can please visit us at sonatype.com. Thank you.
All right, excellent stuff, Michelle. And I have to say, we here at Fortify are very proud to be partnered with Sonatype, love what they are doing in the open source space, and look forward to our future endeavors. So last but certainly not least is another amazing partner of ours, Saltworks Security. I will now pass it over to Dennis Hurst to discuss how Saltworks approaches application security, automation, and integration. The floor is yours, Dennis.
Thank you for joining our presentation. I'm Dennis Hurst with Saltworks Security. I'm the founder and president. You can reach me at dennis@saltworks.io. Again, thanks for joining. Saltworks is an application security company. We partner with organizations to build world-class application security programs. The way that we work with our customers is going through a very systematic process. So first, we're going to work with you to design your program, ensuring that it meets your design criteria from a security perspective and from a development perspective. We recognize that your developers have processes in place that they use to make sure they're developing code on time that meets business requirements. We want to do the least amount of damage we can to that, so we want to be very conscious of how your developers deliver code and integrate into those processes in a very custom way that meets your needs. Next, we would implement any solutions that need to be made a part of the application security program. Common things we would see there would be like Fortify static analysis, potentially Fortify on demand, depending on what environment you'd want to use. Dynamic analysis, which we would typically use Web Inspect for that. But there's other processes that we put in place as well, like threat modeling and things like that, and we'll talk about those in a bit. The next thing we do is go into a management phase. This is where you're actually getting your developers to roll out the software, to integrate Fortify, to be doing dynamic scanning as part of their QA processes, especially if it's a DevOps style build process. But that's really rolling that out to the development teams. And then the last step is measurement, and that's really sort of the summary of the program. And that's where you're measuring and monitoring to make sure that the program is actually being rolled out. So if there are requirements that your developers have before they can go live, especially as you move to a more automated build pipeline, this becomes critical. Because across a large enterprise, you need visibility into what's going on so that you can make sure software is being delivered both rapidly to meet business demands as well as securely. So let's look at a fairly modern development process and talk about integration there. I like to talk about application security in the context of a DevOps pipeline because it's where it's the fastest. It's also where automation can have the most power. Obviously, these things still apply even in a waterfall type development methodology, but really when you're looking at a DevOps pipeline, it kind of takes you to the extreme of having to know what you can do in inline versus what you can't do inline. And my model is not holistic. It's really sort of common things that you would see in most programs. Obviously, every company is different. Every company's security requirements vary. So I've put together a fairly general purpose model. So as we go through our DevOps pipeline and just using sort of the standard industry model for what a DevOps pipeline looks like, there are things that we do as part of that. We do architectural reviews to make sure we're meeting architectural requirements. We'll do threat models to make sure that the applications are being designed well. During those coding processes, we're going to do things like static analysis with a Fortify source code analyzer. Again, could be Fortify on demand, could be Fortify on premise. Both integrate well into a DevOps pipeline or any sort of build pipeline. When you get into the verification stage, you're typically looking at doing some sort of dynamic scanning with something like Web Inspect. Nice thing there is you can pre-configure your scans with a Web Inspect and then integrate it in with a build pipeline. There's a lot of APIs that are there that help you integrate those in an automated way. And then once it's gone through those QA processes, generally if we're talking about DevOps, you're looking at some sort of very rapid automated process. We're then going to package the code up and decide we want to ship it. Some of the APIs that exist in Fortify, Source Code Analyzer, and Software Security Center, as well as Web Inspect, allow us to do build breaks. So this is an important one, especially as you move to DevOps. Typically, a company would come up with some requirements that would say something to the effect of, you can't release with any criticals or highs. So you should be able to fix those rapidly. The way that you enforce that in a DevOps pipeline is by doing build breaks. And the APIs that Fortify exposes help you to do that. It makes it a pretty simple task to build break. Even if you're not even using the plugins, the APIs are there and they're very easy to use. As we release on out into the wild, there's other things that come into play, things like application security pen testing, and then we probably have some sort of web app firewall, content delivery network that may have some of those technologies built into it. Those are also very powerful and should be kept in mind when you're looking at an AppSec program, because what we can see from those is where are we actually being attacked. So if we notice that a particular application is being attacked, Even if it's not vulnerable, it's probably worth going back and asking the question of, are we properly securing it? Maybe we thought it had a low risk, but for some reason it's getting a lot of activity. We may want to give it a wee bit more scrutiny to decide, have we really defended that? So it really becomes a nice closed loop from systems feeding data into development to develop testing and then producing better code as it goes back out. Again, all very automated. Now, one of the questions that people always come up with when you're talking about automation and a DevOps pipeline, and by the way, I'm using the word a because we're looking at one pipeline, one development team at this point. We're going to look more at the enterprise and the challenges that come along with that in just a second, but that's why you see this little thing over here that says a. What I was trying to show by that was simply to say, this is just one. Now we're going to sort of scale back a bit in a second. We'll sort of back up and look from a little bit higher level view across the enterprise in just a second. But if we look back at the tests we're doing, some things can't be done in line. For example, some things are cadence-based, meaning we do it periodically. For example, threat modeling is probably not something you would do with every DevOps release, especially if your DevOps releases are 3, 4, 5 times a day. So what you're going to do for that is set a cadence that says maybe every sprint we review the threat model, every month we review the sprint model. You're going to come up with a risk-based decision of when should you do that. Other things would, I talked about threat modeling. We could look at architectural reviews. Those may only be done when significant changes are made. Penetration testing. If you've got really good automated testing, what's nice is you can take your pen testing work and make it more risk-based and more timely. So some things may only need full penetration test every quarter, every year. They're fairly low risk, but other systems may need more. And you can make a risk-based decision on that. But again, those are cadence-based. And the way that I've looked at that when we've had successful large programs is to say, as long as you're passing these things and you're doing them in a timely fashion, meaning on that cadence, every couple of weeks, every couple of months, whatever the cadence is, you basically are then authorizing that team to release, assuming they pass all their inline testing. So if somebody fails a penetration test, they then will not be able to release in their DevOps pipeline until they fix those issues. The good news there is if it's a DevOps pipeline, they can probably do it pretty quick. So your mean time to resolution goes down radically, and it just becomes a negotiation between the security team and those developers to say, if we're going to let you release very rapidly, that's fine. However, if you fail a pen test, you have to fix it within your next cycle, for example. You may have a timeline for that. But that's what you give as a security team. What they get then is, as long as they pass those inline tests, they know they can release. So it's a nice balance between things that can be automated and things that need to be done more out of band, if you will, or cadence-based. So they're things that really can't be done technically as part of the pipeline, but they can be done more on a cadence. So now what we're going to do is back up a little bit and look at what does it look like from the enterprise view. If we back up to the enterprise level, we see that we don't have just one DevOps pipeline or one particular application being built. What we would see is that there's a lot of applications being built and there's a lot of different methodologies being used. To an enterprise security team, you need a common view. So in my drawing, I've got some DevOps pipelines, I've got some waterfall development going on. We could have just some person sitting at their desk with a computer they're compiling on, so they're just kind of whatever. But we need one view. We need one view of, is the program working? So are our applications being built in a way that fosters security? So the way that we've done that very well is to pull metrics, typically out of Software Security Center and Fortify on Demand, for each of these applications. And there's ways that you can look in there and start to see how the scans are being run, how frequently they're being run, and then some things are a little bit more manual. So there's different ways to approach that. Things can be tracked in Software Security Center as attributes. We can use SharePoints. There's a lot of different ways to solve the problem. But ultimately what we want to know is, for each team that builds applications, what's their maturity level? So how well are they doing at implementing this program? Now in this case, what I'm showing you is really the dashboard that we would see for static analysis. We typically would have the same kind of dashboard for dynamic analysis, threat modeling, architectural reviews. Static analysis, because of its level of automation, tends to lend more to a very nice maturity model, but we do that for other things as well. So some of the things we're going to look at, for example, are going to be Have they run initial scans? Have they had those scans reviewed, and have they gone through a false positive review? A negotiation goes on to agree what's real, what's not, what needs to be fixed, what may be mitigated elsewhere. Next thing we want to know is, have they build integrated? Have they gotten to a clean scan? We flag out clean scan, which typically in most customers means no criticals, no highs. And that's kind of the line they would draw to say, you can release through a DevOps pipeline. So you're giving them that license we discussed earlier to release. And we really look at, have you had a clean scan, which means your code is good enough that you can now release quickly and be fairly comfortable that it's going to be secure, at least reasonably so. And then the big one would be also build break. Before we want to let somebody release automatically, just straight to production with no vetting, you probably want to make sure that security is part of their build break system. So if they find a critical vulnerability, it's going to stop the build, or at least stop the release process. And again, there's lots of ways to track this data. Most of this is coming out of Software Security Center and Fortify on Demand. There's different ways to get it. If you happen to be using the Fortify technology called Cloud Scan, which allows you to distribute scans, we can learn a lot about the client that's running the scan and tell us about build integration. But there's other ways to gather this data as well. And again, every program is custom, so while the goal of the dashboard is the same, the ways that we get these nuts and bolt details can vary a bit. As we're rolling out an enterprise program, something we need to keep in mind, and people seem to forget this one a lot, and it really can be a challenge. If you're in a large company with potentially thousands of developers, you're going to have a lot of interactions with your development teams, and you're going to need a way to manage that. A lot of people use email for that. I don't suggest that. What we found to be very successful is something like a SharePoint site, something where people can submit requests, and then you could work that queue of requests through the system. You could use some sort of service tracking system. Whatever works for you is fine, but ultimately what we want to be able to do is track whenever a development team sends a request in. So things like wanting to do an initial scan, wanting to run some initial dynamic scans, they want to have their scans reviewed, they want help integrating, they want to help with build breaking, those kinds of things for your automated testing. For pen testing, there's going to be activities you want them to do there as well, like baselining, rescanning, approvals, general consulting. So you have lots of activities going on. And as you can imagine, I've just shown here pen testing and scanning. There's going to be other things like threat modeling. So we want a way to manage that. And what we've done that worked well is set up something like a SharePoint. You manage this, the queue with the security team. So as requests come in, you can manage your workload. So it's important to have some sort of system like that. Again, a SharePoint works, whatever all of your developers can get to submit a request. And that's going to vary by company, but just make sure you think through that. I don't suggest using just an email alias. Those emails get lost, they get forgotten, people get upset. So where you've got some sort of service tracking system, it tends to work much better. The service tracking system also allows you to do some metrics on yourself. So these are ways that you're measuring your internal program. As you're automating these build pipelines, they get very complicated. Lots of activities are happening. So as those developers send in requests, they're going to go into that request queue we talked about. Your security folks are going to work the queue. What you also then have the ability to do is pull data out of that for program metrics. Some of the common things we would see, and there's going to be some more advanced ones we'll talk about in a bit, would be things like, how long does it take to perform each of your various activities? So an initial scan may take a day, baseline pen test may take 10 days, whatever your numbers are. It's important to track these metrics. One, you want to know how you're doing as a team, but two, as you go to need more budget, as you get busy, as you get overwhelmed with work, if you've got these kind of metrics, you can go out and start really showing how much work is your team doing, how long does that work take, and based on the growth of applications in your company, how many people is going to take to get the job done. This helps tremendously when it comes to showing your value as a security team, communicating to management why you need more people or what kind of people you need. It's also going to help a lot with demand management. So just understanding if we go to another team of 100 developers or 100 applications, how much work is that going to be? How much time does that take us? So this really helps you to manage your business as a security team. So just a summary of, and I call them the DevOps metrics, but these really could be any automated security build pipeline type integration. Keep in mind, we're going to have kind of three levels of metrics we're going to be looking at. The first are the DevOps team level. That's really just where we're looking for what vulnerabilities do they have, what do they need to fix. It's very much looking at, can this application go live? Has it been built reasonably secure? We're going to look at policy compliance. Have they done things like threat modeling, pen test on the inappropriate cycle, things like that? We want to be able to track that. At the enterprise level, we're going to want to track that program adoption, which is that maturity model we talked about. This also helps you to see any blind spots. So if you've got a team out there that's building code and isn't doing any testing, it's going to make it really obvious that nothing is happening. A lot of times when people have vulnerability dashboards, they don't know what's not on the dashboard. So that leaves them with a huge blind spot. By having that enterprise level dashboard, you're going to understand that. You're going to understand that your program maturity, even if a team has zero maturity. And then third is that last level of metrics, which is really measuring your security team. So understanding what are your service levels, how fast are you servicing those developers that effectively are your customers, and then doing demand management, understanding what kind of workload do you have on your team, do you need more people, where are you going to need more people in the future, so that you can really manage your business and be an effective security manager, if that's your job. So I appreciate you joining me for the presentation. I hope you got some valuable information from it. You can reach me again at my email, dennis@saltworks.io. Also, you're welcome to come out to saltworks.io, our website, and read more information. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook. Have a great day. Hope you enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Well, this concludes our speakers for this webinar. But before we go, I just want to briefly talk about Fortify on Demand. Fortify on Demand delivers application security as a service, providing customers with the security testing, vulnerability management, expertise, and support it needs. Fortify on Demand makes it easy to create, supplement, and expand a complete software security assurance program, including SAST, DAST, MAST, IAST, RASP, continuous application monitoring, and secure developer training. Customers choose Fortify on Demand because of its ease of use, deployment flexibility, and quality and accuracy of scan results. Those same customers end up staying with Fortify on Demand because of our service, the scalability of the product, but most importantly to this webinar, the ecosystem and integration. With Fortify on Demand, you can integrate static and dynamic application security testing throughout the software lifecycle. You can run automated scans and get actionable results. You can get line of code detail and specific fix locations with static testing. Get exploitability and overall security information with dynamic testing, and automatically push scan results to the IDE, defect management, and governance tools. All of these benefits go back to that fundamental principle of application security, which is to build security into your way of thinking and operating without restricting agility and innovation. We encourage you to go download a free trial of Fortify on Demand today or contact us to receive a demo. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today for this webinar, and a special thanks to my speakers, Jimmy Rabin, Michelle Duffy, and Dennis Hurst for their time. We hope you enjoyed this webinar and have a great rest of your day.